We've just arrived to this area. This area is called Jaris, and the border post is in front of us. God willing, tomorrow we will start clearing the Iraqi-Syrian border areas, starting from this area to El Qaim, and we will continue operations until we achieve full control of the border area.
And now to Iraq, where Iranian-backed Hashd Al Shaabi, or the Popular Mobilization brigades, have advanced to Iraq's border with Syria. The brigades have been in the forefront of the battle to retake Mosul from Daesh, and now they're determined to clear the entire Sinjar region of Daesh, even if that means going into Syria. That would lead to a potential alliance with Syrian regime troops, which could further embolden Bashar al Assad and further complicate the conflict on the ground. Well, to unpack this and more, I'm joined by Ali Alawi from London. He's the former Iraq Minister of Defense, Finance and Trade, and author of The Occupation of Iraq, Winning the War, Losing the Peace. Sir, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure having you on the program. Before we talk about the Shia militias and so on, let's talk about Daesh and our commiserations and sympathies with your people after those horrific attacks last night and this morning. Atrocious attacks. I mean, children eating ice cream in Ramadan, getting blown to bits. Despite the fact that it seems as if Daesh is losing ground in Iraq, it can still conduct these sorts of attacks in Baghdad. Does that worry you?
Yes, it does. Obviously, any loss of life is extremely worrisome, and I think we should have been able to put a stop to it now. But the fact that Baghdad is a city of nearly 8 million people, and it's extremely difficult to control access into and out of it all the time. I think our security forces have done a reasonable job to reduce the amount of outrages as we've had in the past years. But I don't think you can totally control it. It will take much more effort to eliminate this type of threat.
Are you confident that Iraq can retake Mosul and defeat Daesh, at least within your borders, say before the end of this year?
No, I have no doubt about that. In fact, what's happening now in Mosul is that Daesh is reduced to just a few neighborhoods, probably less than 10% of the total area of the city. There's a lot of fierce fighting going on there in Mosul now because the numbers involved are about 12, maybe to 1,500 Daesh fighters with their families there. So they're putting up a fight to the end, to the finish. So it's taking much more time than would normally be the case if civilian casualties were not an issue.
Now involved in yes.
Once they lose Mosul, which I think is a matter of time, then I think Daesh as an organized force that is of the armed wing of the caliphate will be over in Iraq. That doesn't mean that we will have peace and tranquility and that something else post-Daesh might not emerge, but possibly not with the same kind of virulence and extent.
I'm glad you brought that up, if something else post-Daesh does emerge, because what we're seeing, let me just kind of spell it out, big picture then. You have Shia militias committing atrocities, documented atrocities, not just the Der Spiegel report, for example. You have Amnesty International and so on talking about atrocities committed by Shia militias. You have the coalition killing hundreds of civilians in their bombing campaign against Daesh. We know, we've seen this movie play out in history, haven't we? Mercilessly trying to crush a terror group and killing so many civilians along the way, and so many people who get swept up in it invariably creates something far worse down the line. We thought Al-Qaeda was bad, Daesh came around. Are you fearful that we're going to see something that will make Daesh look like kindergarten children in the years to come?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen in terms of the extent of human depravity as we have in the form of Daesh. It can become worse. I can't see how, but it could. However, I don't accept the way that you have characterized events. There's a certain underlying text in what you're saying that makes it equivalent between what Daesh's atrocities and before that the atrocities of Al-Qaeda, and between what the Hashd Al Shaabi or the Popular Mobilization forces are doing and what the allies or the coalition is doing. There's obviously a great deal of damage done by the Allied bombing, and sometimes it reaches to the death of innocent civilians. There's no hiding that. And there's no doubt also that there are rogue elements within the Popular Mobilization forces which are out of control and do commit acts of violence, of death, of rapine. I'm not trying to deny that or belittle that. But these acts cannot be compared to the 45,000 people killed as a result of suicide bombing in Iraq, or the tens of thousands killed deliberately by Daesh, including something like 1,800 in Camp Speicher in cold blood. Neither can be compared to the losses that are being given by brave fighters who are defending their country. Last week I was in the holy town of Najaf, where every hour there are about 5 to 7 coffins brought in for their last rites. These were all Popular Mobilization forces fighting in this war against global terror. So I can't see the basis of this equivalence, which I do not accept.
Okay, so you're saying I'm making a false equivalence. And again, to be absolutely clear, to be absolutely fundamentally clear, Daesh is, on another level in terms of its depravity. But you're saying I'm making an equivalence here. The Iraqi Prime Minister has also made this equivalence on May the 20th. TEDx Baghdad.
No, he didn't. I'm sorry. This is not correct.
I've got his exact words.
There were rogue elements.
Sure, but I've got his exact words. He said they want their gangs. Can I quote him and then let's talk? They want their gangs to become stronger than the state and society, so they can control the resources of the people by force, by threat of weapons. If you raise your voice against them, they will kidnap you. Don't try to fool us by saying that we belong to the same sect. Didn't ISIS say that they were protecting the Sunnis? Wasn't this their method? Weren't these their lies, right? So he made this equivalence, he said, and understandly, he's talking about elements within them. But these are people committing atrocities. He's making an equivalence.
This is really selective. This is really selective quotation.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
The Popular Mobilization forces are part and parcel of the government apparatus. They report directly to the Prime Minister. So he's unlikely to condemn 150,000 people to this kind of categorization. He's talking about the rogue elements, which I have just said, are responsible for outrages and atrocities. But they number probably in the hundreds, not in the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands that you've seemed to have implied. Now, these people, yes, I would not put them in the same category as Daesh. I'd put them in the same category as terrorists, those who have bedeviled and have ruined our country over the last 14 years. Daesh is not a category of criminality. And so far, they haven't yet reached that kind of organized depravity that we were talking about.
Sure. So even if it is hundreds, you mentioned hundreds, we have hundreds of these people fighting for Iraq, doing unspeakable things as they're fighting Daesh as well, persecuting Sunnis based on a sectarian basis, right? And then we have coalition airstrikes that are killing hundreds of civilians.
No, not right. I'm sorry, I don't accept that.
You said hundreds.
I don't accept that. A lot of these people are criminals. A lot of these people are outlaws. They were attracted into the PMF because of the salaries, because of the opportunities for this kind of pillaging. So
but from the perspective
specifically sectarian, there must be some people on a vengeance track too.
Undoubtedly, so I can't psychoanalyze all of them, but from the perspective of, say, the victims, they see themselves, or their families see themselves as being killed because they were Sunni, right? That further stokes the sectarian craziness.
That is true. That is true.
Fair enough, right?
That.
Okay, so I can't psychoanalyze them. So Sunnis are being killed, and the perception is they're being killed for being Sunni, and then you have hundreds killed by coalition airstrikes. This sounds like it could get very ugly, and again, it goes back to the beginning. What comes after Daesh, and might Daesh be defeated, but then the whole sectarian civil war kicks off again? Don't you worry about that?
Of course I worry about that, Mr. Imran, but let me tell you one thing. The biggest losers in this Daesh affair since 2014 have been the Sunnis. There's about 3.5 million people, mainly Sunni Arabs, who have been displaced from their homes, from their lands, by the depravities of Daesh. They're not there as refugees. They're not there in camps. They're not there in various parts of the Middle East, living in squalid conditions because of the actions of the Popular Mobilization forces. They are there because of Daesh. And I have to be very, very clear about that. The forces that we are mobilized now include rogue elements, yes, but the majority of them, the vast majority of them, are fighting a patriotic war to regain territories that have been taken over by depraved sectarians of Daesh, something which you don't seem to want to refer to. Daesh exists because of the virulent anti-Shia sectarianism that exists in Salafi jihadism and in Wahhabism. And if we don't uproot that, we will not be able to find a solution to the problems of Iraq, let alone the Middle East.
Understood and agreed. So if these guys, members from among Hashd Al Shaabi, cross the border into Syria, you call them patriots, if they cross the border into Syria and get involved in the fight there, is it going to make things better or worse?
No, I think I'm not in favor of any people breaking the sovereignty and integrity of a sister country, of any state for that matter. They should not enter whatsoever into Syrian terrain unless they're in hot pursuit, which is something that is given in international law, or unless they're specifically invited by the legitimate Syrian government. And when they're going in there, they're not going in there, quote, as Shia militias. They'll be going in there as part and parcel of the Iraqi security forces, reporting to the Prime Minister. I personally do not wish for this to happen. I don't want to see Iraq. We have enough trouble and enough problems in our own country to export these things or to nearby territories, or to use forces who have produced an element of security in our country, utilized elsewhere in other people's battles. But the battlefield in the Middle East, I'm sorry to say, has been made to be a contiguous one. And it is really disingenuous to think that you can put a surgical line between one country or the other when battle lines are so fluid and people can move in from one part of the country. After all, Daesh came into Iraq from Syria. It did not come into Iraq from the moon. So these kinds of borders that we're talking about, and that this is part of a grand conspiracy, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with creating security on our side of the border. And if that entails hot pursuit, then I have no problem with that. But I would not want to see our forces involved whatsoever, unless they're specifically requested by the legitimate Syrian government to play a part in Syria's wars.
Ali Alawi, it's been a pleasure having you on the program, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.